I remember the day my world turned upside down. It started with a single question that cut deeper than any blade. Where did you hide it, Emily? My mother's voice, usually warm and familiar, sounded cold and foreign. I stood there frozen in the kitchen doorway, still holding the grocery bag I had just brought in. Her eyes burned into me with a mix of anger and fear. Hide what? I whispered, though part of me already knew what she meant. The bracelet, she snapped. Your grandmother's gold bracelet. It's gone. My heart slammed against my ribs. That bracelet wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the last memory my mother had of her own mother. I knew how much it meant to her. But the idea that she thought I had taken it felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to speak, to explain that I hadn't seen it, but the words wouldn't come out right. All I managed was, Mom, I didn't. Her face hardened. I don't want to hear your lies, Emily. Just give it back. My mind raced. Where could it be? Had someone else come into the house? But who? And why would they only take that bracelet? She turned away, her shoulders stiff. Go to your room, she ordered. I can't even look at you right now. I obeyed, my legs weak as I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. Once inside my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The disbelief burned in my chest. My own mother thinks I'm a thief. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand she believe me. But the fear in her eyes haunted me more than her anger. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying her words, her expression, the raw disappointment on her face. It wasn't just the accusation that hurt. It was the thought that maybe, deep down, she had never truly trusted me at all. By morning my world felt smaller. The house seemed colder. My mother avoided me, barely speaking except to ask if I was ready to admit what I did. But I hadn't done anything. And as the days passed, my determination grew. If she wouldn't believe my innocence, then I would have to prove it. Little did I know the truth would be darker and closer than I ever imagined. The next morning, the silence between us was so thick it felt like I could choke on it. My mother avoided my eyes as she poured herself coffee. The chair where I usually sat felt like forbidden territory, so I stood awkwardly near the sink. I'm going out, I said softly, half hoping she'd ask where or why. But she only nodded without looking up. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the cold air stinging my face. I had one place in mind, my best friend Lily. Lily had known me since kindergarten. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was her. When I got to her house, she answered the door with a worried look. Emily, what's wrong? The words tumbled out of me in a rush. The missing bracelet, my mother's accusation, the look in her eyes that haunted me even in my dreams. Emily, you'd never steal, Lily said firmly. Her faith in me brought tears to my eyes. I know, but my mom doesn't believe that, I whispered. We sat in her room, brainstorming. Who else has been in your house? Lily asked. I thought about it. Just a few people. My mother's new boyfriend, Mark, the cleaning lady who came once a week, and my cousin Sarah, who had visited a few days ago. Lily frowned. What about Mark? Do you trust him? I hesitated. Mark was charming, always quick with a smile and a compliment. But there was something about him I couldn't quite name, something that made me uneasy. He wouldn't, I started, but my words trailed off. Because the truth was, I didn't know him at all. Maybe you should look around. Maybe you'll find something, Lily suggested. The thought scared me. Snooping felt wrong, but what choice did I have? My mother's love was slipping away from me, replaced by suspicion and hurt. That night I waited until Mark left. Then, heart pounding, I stepped into his room. I knew it was wrong, but desperation overruled my guilt. I opened drawers, lifted clothes, searched every corner I could think of. Nothing. Then, near his bedside table, I found a small box tucked away under some papers. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was cash, receipts, and a single gold earring. Not the bracelet. But still, why would he hide it? A sudden noise made me jump. Footsteps in the hallway. I quickly put everything back and slipped out, my pulse racing so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. In my room I tried to calm down. Maybe it meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything. The next day I told Lily. It's not proof, she said carefully, but it's something. Keep looking. I didn't want to, but I knew she was right. If my own mother wouldn't defend me, I had to defend myself. And so began days of quiet investigation, of stolen moments searching for clues, of doubt gnawing at my heart. All the while, the distance between me and my mother grew until it felt like we were strangers living under the same roof. But the truth was waiting in the shadows, and when I finally uncovered it, nothing could have prepared me for what I would find. Days turned into a week, and each morning felt heavier than the last. My mother barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was only with clipped words and cold eyes. The warmth that had once filled our home had vanished, replaced by a silence that felt almost alive, like it was watching me, accusing me too. I couldn't live like that. Every time I saw her look at me with disappointment, something inside me broke a little more. So I kept searching quietly, carefully. I checked Mark's things again, hoping I had missed something, but the bracelet was never there. The gold earring still haunted me though. Who did it belong to? And why was it hidden? Then one rainy afternoon I decided to search the living room, the place we all used most. I started with the drawers beneath the TV, then behind the couch cushions, my hands shaking as I worked. My heart stopped when I opened the small cabinet by the window. There, hidden behind some old magazines, was a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop. My hands trembled so hard I could barely unfold it. The date matched the day after the bracelet went missing. And written on it, under item, were the words, "Gold bracelet, vintage." I felt my knees buckle and sank to the floor, clutching the paper. My first instinct was relief. Proof. But relief quickly turned to dread. The name on the receipt was Mark's. I knew I should tell my mother right away, but fear froze me. What if she still didn't believe me? What if she thought I planted the receipt? The thought of her accusing me again terrified me more than anything else. So instead I went to Lily. She listened silently, her eyes wide. "Emily, you have to tell her," she urged. "This proves it wasn't you." "I know," I whispered. "But what if it breaks her heart? He loves him, Lily. And after everything, what if she still chooses him over me?" Lily's expression softened. "Then she was never really on your side to begin with. But you deserve the truth, Emily. She does too." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The rain tapped gently against my window like it was urging me to move, to act. And finally, with my heart in my throat, I made a decision. The next morning, after Mark left for work, I found my mother in the kitchen. Her back was to me, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Mom," I began, my voice shaking. She didn't turn around. "I need you to see something," I continued, stepping closer. Slowly she turned, her expression weary and guarded. I handed her the receipt. For a moment she didn't react. Then her eyes scanned the paper, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's from the pawn shop," I said quietly. "Mark took your bracelet." Her hand trembled as she held the paper. "How did you get this?" "I found it," I confessed. "I've been looking, trying to prove I didn't do it." Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Finally she looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, the first real sign of softness I'd seen in weeks. "Emily, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You already thought I was guilty." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh God, what have I done?" She reached for me, but I hesitated. The hurt still sat deep in my chest, raw and aching. But seeing her break, seeing her regret, it cracked something inside me too. She pulled me into her arms, her body shaking. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have trusted you. I should have known." I pressed my face into her shoulder, letting the tears fall. For a few moments, it felt like we were mother and daughter again, the way we used to be. But the truth still hung between us, and it wasn't over yet. Later that evening, Mark came home. My mother waited for him in the living room, the receipt clenched in her fist. I sat on the stairs, watching, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed through the house. "Mark," she said, her voice low but steady. "We need to talk." He looked from her to me, confusion flickering across his face. "What's going on?" She held out the receipt. "Care to explain this?" His eyes darted to the paper, then back to her. For a split second, something ugly crossed his face. Panic, anger. Then he tried to smile. "Honey, where did you find that?" "Don't honey me," she snapped. "Did you take my bracelet?" His mouth opened and closed. "Of course not. This must be a mistake." My mother's voice shook. "Mark, don't lie to me." I stepped closer, my legs trembling. "I found it hidden in your things," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "You pawned it." His expression changed, hardening into something cold I had never seen before. "You little brat," he hissed. "Mark," my mother gasped. He turned on her, his face twisted. "What? You're going to believe her over me? After everything?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "Because she's my daughter. And you betrayed us." His chest heaved, rage spilling out of him. "You think you can just throw me out? After all I've done for you? You need to leave," she whispered. He took a step toward her and I felt fear surge through me, cold and sharp. But then she raised her hand, the one holding the receipt. "Leave. Now." For a moment it looked like he might do something terrible. But then he spat at the floor, turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The silence that followed felt deafening. My mother collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. I stood there, numb, the events replaying in my mind over and over. Finally she looked at me, her eyes red. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I let him into our lives and I let him hurt you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I just wanted you to see the truth." She reached for me again, and this time I didn't pull away. We sat together, holding each other in the quiet. Outside the rain had stopped. But inside it felt like something had finally broken open, letting light in. The days that followed felt strange, like I was living in the ruins of something that had just burned down. Mark was gone, truly gone, and my mother and I were left to face the ashes of what remained. For the first time in weeks we spoke. Really spoke. Late into the night, sitting on the old couch in the living room, she told me things I had never known. Her loneliness after my father left, the fear of growing old alone, and how Mark's attention had felt like salvation. I listened, part of me aching for her, part of me still hurting that she had turned against me so quickly. "Emily," she whispered once, her voice cracking, "I was so desperate to believe in him. And I was so afraid that maybe you had changed, that maybe I had failed you." "You didn't fail me, Mom," I said softly. "You just forgot who I was." She nodded, tears running silently down her face. "I won't forget again." But healing wasn't instant. The house still felt heavy, haunted by words that couldn't be unsaid. Some mornings I'd catch her watching me, guilt shadowing her eyes. And some nights I'd wake from dreams where I was screaming that I was innocent, but no one listened. Lily stayed close through it all. We'd sit in her room talking about everything and nothing, and sometimes about Mark. "You think he'll come back?" she asked once. "I don't know," I admitted. But deep down I worried. Because men like Mark don't always stay gone. And secrets have a way of crawling back into the light. One Friday evening, about 2 weeks after he left, I came home to find my mother standing in the doorway, pale and shaking. "Emily," she whispered, "someone broke into the house." My heart stopped. "What? When?" "Just now, I heard the back door. I think he's still here." My pulse roared in my ears. "Call the police," I urged. But before she could move, we both heard it, a floorboard creaking upstairs. For a moment we stood frozen. Then, without thinking, I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the front door. Another sound, a voice low and angry. "Where is it?" My blood turned to ice. "Mark." I dragged my mother outside, fumbling with my phone to call 911. My hands shook so badly I could barely hit the buttons. Within minutes, flashing lights filled the street. 2 officers ran inside while another stayed with us on the porch. My mother's hand was cold in mine, her face drained of color. They found Mark in my mother's bedroom, rummaging through drawers. When they let him out in handcuffs, his eyes met mine. For a heartbeat there was pure hatred there, raw and poisonous. "You think this is over?" he spat. But it was over. At least I hope so. After that night something in me shifted. The fear that had wrapped around my heart like a vine began to loosen. Mark was charged with burglary and theft, and though he made bail, part of me believed he wouldn't dare come near us again. Life settled into something like normal, though not quite the normal we had before. My mother and I moved through the house differently, as if testing the strength of the walls that had once betrayed us. One afternoon she knocked on my bedroom door, something she hadn't done in years. "Can I come in?" she asked gently. I nodded and she sat on the edge of my bed. "Emily, there's something I need to say." I waited, my heart tight. "I know saying sorry doesn't erase what I did. I let my fear blind me and I hurt you. But I need you to know, you didn't deserve that. None of it." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging. "I know, Mom." He reached for my hand. And if you ever feel like you can't trust me again, I'll understand. But I hope someday you will. I do trust you, I whispered, surprised to realize it was true, at least partly. The wound was still there, but it had started to close. We sat there in silence, hand in hand, the late afternoon light turning her hair golden. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath around her. Later I met Lily at our usual spot by the river. The water glinted under the sun, and for a moment, it felt like the world had turned gentle again. So what now? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But it feels like a new start. She nudged my shoulder with hers. You deserve that. And for the first time in a long time I let myself believe she was right. Weeks passed, then months. Spring came, painting the trees with blossoms, and for a while life felt beautifully ordinary. But one morning, while walking past my mother's room, I heard her crying. Not the quiet, controlled crying I'd heard before, but something raw and broken. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. She sat on the floor by her bed, holding the empty jewelry box where the bracelet used to be. I can't stop thinking about it, she whispered through her tears. What he did. What I let happen. I knelt beside her. Mom, it wasn't your fault. She shook her head. But I invited him in, Emily. I trusted him more than my own daughter. Hearing her say it out loud hurt more than I expected, but it also felt like a healing. You were lonely, I said softly. And he took advantage of that. She looked at me, her eyes red. And I took it out on you. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. And for a long time we stayed like that, two people who had been hurt by the same man in different ways. After that, she packed away the other jewelry, saying it was time to stop clinging to things that only brought pain. It felt like a small funeral, but also like closing a chapter that had already gone on too long. Time moved strangely after everything that happened. Some days felt endless, heavy with what-ifs and half-remembered fears. Other days passed in a blur, almost as if life was gently reminding me that not every moment had to be marked by pain. Summer arrived quietly, the kind of warm, lazy summer that always made our small town feel softer somehow. The flowers bloomed along the sidewalks, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and hope. I spent more afternoons by the river with Lily, letting the sun soak into my skin, trying to forget the cold months that had come before. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, I found myself telling Lily everything I hadn't said out loud before. About the nights I lay awake, terrified my mother would never see me the same way again. About the dreams where Mark was still in our house, his shadow creeping along the hallway walls. About the ache that lived behind my ribs, dull but constant. She listened, her head tilted, her eyes soft. When I finished, she said quietly, "You were never alone, you know." I felt alone, I whispered. I know, she said. But I was there. Your mom, even if she forgot for a while, was there too. And you were stronger than both of us. Her words sank into me, not fixing everything but easing the tightness in my chest. Later that night, back in my room, I pulled out the small box where I kept my own treasures. An old photograph of my father holding me as a baby, a seashell I'd found with Lily when we were 8, and now, folded carefully among them, the receipt that had changed everything. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to erase the memory of what Mark had done. But another part, the part that had survived, knew I needed to keep it. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that sometimes the truth does come out, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. A few weeks later, my mother suggested we visit Grandma's grave together. I hadn't been since the bracelet went missing. It had felt too raw, too full of guilt and anger. But standing there beside my mother, the sun warming the granite headstone, something shifted inside me. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered, her hand resting on the cold stone. "For not protecting what you left us. And for not protecting Emily." A breeze rustled the leaves above us, soft and forgiving. And though I couldn't be sure what my grandmother would have said standing there, I felt something like peace for the first time in months. Afterward, we went for ice cream, something we hadn't done together since I was little. Sitting across from her, watching her laugh at how quickly hers melted, I realized how long it had been since I'd seen her smile without guilt shadowing her face. It didn't erase everything that had happened, but it was a start. Summer deepened and the world felt lighter. But even as the heat of July wrapped around us, there were moments when shadows from the past reached out, cold and unwelcome. One evening, I came home from Lily's to find a plain white envelope on the kitchen table. My name was written on it in a hand I recognized instantly, Mark's. My pulse spiked, fear buzzing in my veins. "Mom." I called, my voice tight. She appeared from the hallway, her face pale. "I found it in the mailbox," she said quietly. Together we opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were few, but they coiled like snakes on the page. "You ruined everything. Don't think this is over." For a long moment neither of us spoke. The room felt smaller, the air sharp in my lungs. "I'm calling the police," my mother said, her voice shaking but firm. "An officer came by that evening, took the note and promised to file a report. He was kind, but I could see it in his eyes. Words on paper don't always keep people safe." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to stretch and breathe. I kept the light on, curled under my blanket, trying to slow my racing heart. The next morning, I found my mother at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered. "Move somewhere else. Start over." Part of me wanted that too, to run, to erase every memory tied to this house, these walls. But another part, stronger than I expected, shook my head. "No," I said softly. "He already took enough from us. I don't want to give him this too." Her eyes met mine, surprise flickering there, then something like pride. "You're braver than I am," she said. "I'm just tired of being afraid," I whispered. She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Then we face it. Together." And so we did. We changed the locks, installed cameras, and told our neighbors what had happened. Each step felt small, but together they built a sense of safety brick by brick. Lily helped too, walking me home after dark, staying over on weekends. And slowly, the house that had once felt haunted began to feel like ours again. But even as days passed without more notes, a question lingered in my mind like a whisper. What if he comes back? Summer stretched on, and though the days were hot and bright, my nights stayed restless. I kept hearing Mark's words in my mind, "Don't think this is over." They echoed at the edge of my thoughts when the wind rattled the windows, or when I woke in the dark, unsure what had stirred me. But strangely, life didn't stop. School was out, but I found part-time work at the little bookstore downtown. A quiet, dusty place that smelled like paper and old wood. The owner, Mrs. Carson, had known me since I was a kid. When she heard about what happened, she didn't ask questions. She just gave me the job and told me I could bring my homework if it ever got slow. There was something comforting about the routine. Stacking books, wiping shelves, smiling at regular customers. In that small, sunlit shop, the fear that clung to me at home felt lighter, as if the smell of ink and worn pages chased it away. One afternoon, while unpacking a box of used books, I found an old journal wedged at the bottom. Its leather cover was cracked and soft, the pages yellowed and brittle. For some reason, I couldn't put it back on the shelf. Instead, I sat behind the counter, hidden from view, and flipped through the pages. Most of it was empty, but near the middle someone had written, "The past doesn't stay buried, but neither does the truth." I read the words over and over until they felt carved into me. They weren't profound on their own, but at that moment they felt like permission, to remember, to speak, and not to let fear silence me. When my shift ended, I tucked the journal into my bag. I told myself I'd ask Mrs. Carson if I could buy it, but deep down I think I knew I couldn't leave it behind. That night I showed it to my mother. She turned the brittle pages carefully. "Do you know who wrote this?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. But it feels important somehow." She smiled just a little. "Then keep it. Maybe it's yours now." I placed it on my nightstand beside my photo of Dad. And for the first night in weeks, I slept without waking. The next morning, Lily and I met at the diner across from the bookstore. We sat in our usual booth, the vinyl cracked from years of teenage secrets. I told her about the journal and she leaned in, curious. "It's like it found you," she said, stirring her coffee. "Maybe," I admitted. "It just makes me think, maybe I shouldn't try so hard to forget everything that happened." Lily nodded slowly. "You don't have to forget to move on. You just have to stop letting it decide everything you do." Her words stung a little because she was right. Since the night Mark came back, I'd been measuring every decision against my fear of him. Do I go out after dark? Do I answer the phone when it's an unknown number? Do I let my guard down even for a second? That afternoon after Lily left, I stayed behind at the diner. I opened the journal again, tracing the faded letters. And I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't let what happened to me become the only story I had to tell. But it's never as simple as making a promise, is it? One evening, as I locked the bookstore door, I caught a glimpse of someone across the street. A man standing by the lamppost, staring straight at me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My chest locked tight, my keys clattering to the ground. It wasn't Mark. I realized that after a second, my heart still hammering. Just a stranger waiting for a bus. But my hands shook as I bent to pick up my keys. Fear doesn't disappear because you decide you're done being afraid. It waits in shadows, patient and silent, ready to remind you it's still there. At home, I didn't tell my mother what happened. She'd been sleeping better lately, her smile coming easier. I didn't want to take that away. But later, alone in my room, I opened the journal again. And in shaky handwriting on a fresh page, I wrote, "I'm scared. But I'm still here." The words weren't brave. They weren't even hopeful. But they were mine, and that mattered more than I expected. Days kept rolling forward, even when it felt like time itself had been wounded. And slowly, almost invisibly, I started to find a rhythm again. The bookstore became my refuge. Dusty shelves and whispered conversations, a gentle reminder that life could still feel normal, even if only for a few hours. One late afternoon, as golden light spilled through the front windows, a woman came in I'd never seen before. She wore a faded denim jacket and had a way of scanning the store like she was measuring every shadow. When her eyes met mine, something in her gaze felt oddly familiar. Sharp, watchful, like someone who'd learned the hard way to trust nothing at first glance. She walked slowly through the aisles, pausing now and then to pick up a book, turning it over as if weighing its story against her own. Finally, she came to the counter with a single paperback, an old mystery novel, the cover creased and worn. "You like these?" she asked, her voice low, almost tired. "I do," I answered. "I like how they remind you there's always something hidden waiting to be found." She nodded, her mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Life's like that too, isn't it?" Before I could answer, she paid in cash, thanked me softly, and left. But even after the bell over the door stopped ringing, her words stayed. Life's like that too. Hidden truths. Unspoken fears. The pieces of us we bury because we're too scared of what happens if someone else digs them up. That night, I wrote again in the journal. I'd started filling more pages. Thoughts, questions, half-finished sentences I couldn't say aloud. But it felt different this time, like I was speaking to someone who might understand. Some days I think I'm healing. Other days I'm sure I'm just hiding it better. The words were ugly, but they were honest. And when I closed the journal, it felt lighter in my hands. A week later, something happened that shook me in a way I hadn't expected. I came home to find my mother sitting in the living room, a cardboard box at her feet. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. Birthdays, vacations, blurry Christmas mornings. "Thought it was time we looked at these together," she said. Her voice was careful, almost apologetic, as if she didn't know if I'd say yes. I sat beside her, and for an hour we sifted through snapshots of a family that had felt happier then, or maybe just younger, not yet bruised by betrayal. My mother pointed at one photo of me, maybe 10 years old, smiling with 2 missing teeth. "You always smiled like the whole world was yours," she whispered. "Not anymore," I heard myself say before I could stop it. Her face fell, but she didn't look away. "I know," she murmured. "And I'm sorry, Emily. Truly sorry for being the reason that smile changed." I didn't answer right away. The apology felt heavier because it wasn't the first, but it was the first that felt like she'd forgiven herself enough to mean it. "I'm trying," I whispered finally, "to get that part of me back." "I'm trying too," she said, her voice breaking. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed on the couch, the photos still spread across the coffee table. I traced the edges of each picture, searching for the moment it all shifted. But life isn't that neat. There wasn't a single photograph where it happened. In one, Mark was there, arm slung casually over my mother's shoulder, his smile wide and bright. Even looking at it made my stomach clench. But I forced myself not to turn it face down. He'd stolen so much. I wouldn't let him steal my right to look back too. I found a picture of my father taken years before he left. I'd forgotten how young he'd looked then, how his hand rested protectively on my shoulder. Staring at it, I realized I barely remembered the sound of his voice. Time had blurred him into something like a dream, half real and half invented. Yet what surprised me most wasn't the ache of missing him. It was the sharper pain of realizing how many memories I'd let Mark take from me, simply by being part of them. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, and made another quiet promise to myself. I won't let what he did become the only story I remember. A few days later, Lily invited me to her house for a sleepover. Our first since everything happened. It felt almost silly, like stepping back into childhood. But as we sprawled on her bedroom floor, painting each other's nails and whispering secrets in the half-light, I felt something loosen inside me, like laughter could be safe again. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked suddenly, her voice softer than before. "All the time," I admitted. "And it scares me. But it also feels open somehow." She smiled. "I like that. Open." And in that moment, for the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a door slammed shut. It felt like a path, not easy, not safe, but mine to choose. Summer drifted into fall, and the air grew crisp enough to see my breath in the mornings. Leaves burned gold and red along the sidewalks, the world changing its colors as if to remind me that nothing stays the same forever. Not seasons, not pain, not even fear. At the bookstore, I settled into a quiet routine. Mrs. Carson let me design a small staff picks shelf, and though it seemed silly at first, I loved it. Choosing which books to share felt like a way of speaking without having to use my own voice. One afternoon, I placed the old journal I'd found months ago on that shelf. I added a handwritten note. "For anyone who needs to remember, the truth matters." I didn't expect anyone to notice. But the next day it was gone, bought by someone I'd never seen before. Part of me ached to see it leave, but another part felt strangely free, as if letting go of those words was a step forward. At home, the changes were softer, smaller, but no less real. My mother and I cooked dinner together more often now, filling the kitchen with the smell of garlic and laughter that felt less forced. We still had quiet moments when guilt or memory crept in, but they passed more quickly, like clouds moving across a sky that was mostly clear. One evening, as we dried dishes, she surprised me by asking, "Do you ever want to see your father?" I froze, dish towel in hand. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Sometimes I do. Sometimes I think it would just hurt more." She nodded slowly. "I've thought about reaching out to him too. But I've always been afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked softly. "That it would remind me of everything that went wrong. That it would open wounds instead of closing them." I looked at her, really looked, and realized how heavy her regrets must be. For years I'd seen her only as my mother. The one who hurt me, the one who failed to protect me. But standing there, I saw her as a woman too. Someone who had lost, who had loved badly, who had tried and sometimes failed, just like I had. "Maybe some wounds don't close completely," I said. "But that doesn't mean we stop living." He smiled then, small but real. "You're wiser than I was at your age," she whispered. "I had to be," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Her smile faltered, but she didn't look away. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm sorry for that." As the leaves fell, school started again. Walking those halls felt different now. Not because everyone knew my story, they didn't, but because I carried it differently. It wasn't a secret I had to hide or a shame that made me small. It was something that had happened to me, not something that was me. One afternoon, I stayed late in the library working on an essay. As I packed my bag, I noticed a girl sitting alone, her shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. I'd seen her before in passing, quiet, always sitting near the back of the class. Something made me pause. Maybe it was how familiar that posture felt. The way fear can fold you into yourself until you barely take up space. "Hey," I said softly, surprising even myself. "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled, her eyes red from crying. "Yeah," she lied quickly. I hesitated, then sat down a few chairs away. "You don't have to tell me. I just wanted to say it gets easier. Not always fast and not all at once, but it does." She stared at me for a moment, like she couldn't decide if she believed me. Then she whispered, "Thanks." It wasn't much, but as I walked home later, I realized it was the first time I'd used what happened to me to reach someone else. Not to be pitied, but to offer something real. And it felt right. At night, I still had bad dreams sometimes. In them, Mark stood in the hallway, his face twisted in anger, his shadow stretching long across my floor. But even in those dreams, I wasn't frozen anymore. I spoke. I screamed. I fought back. One morning, after a particularly vivid nightmare, I wrote in my new journal, "I may never stop being afraid. But fear doesn't get to speak for me anymore." Reading those words back, I didn't feel cured or whole. But I felt something better, stronger. Autumn deepened, and on a windy October afternoon, Lily and I sat on the steps outside the bookstore, sharing a paper bag of hot chestnuts. "You seem different," she said, cracking one open. "How?" I asked. "I don't know, lighter. Like you're not carrying it all by yourself anymore." I thought about that. "Maybe I'm not," I said finally. "Maybe telling the truth, even just to myself, helped more than I realized." She smiled. "I'm glad. You deserve that." The wind whipped leaves around us, and for a moment, I felt so grateful it almost hurt. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because for the first time in so long I could see a future that belonged to me. November arrived dressed in gray clouds and sharp winds that rattled the windows at night. At the bookstore, we strung up small lights along the shelves, their soft glow turning even the darkest corners warm. The town itself seemed to slow down, people wrapped in coats and scarves, breath rising like fog in the cold morning air. One quiet afternoon, as I restocked the history section, Mrs. Carson approached, holding a faded envelope. "I found this tucked inside an old donation box," she said. "It's addressed to you." My heart stumbled. The handwriting was familiar in a way that chilled me before I even opened it. "Mark." With shaking fingers, I unfolded the letter. His words spilled across the page in messy ink. "Emily, you might think you've won, but you haven't. You ruined my life, turned your mother against me. But remember this. People don't forget what's been taken from them. One day you see." I felt my throat tighten, heat crawling up my neck. But as I read it again, something surprising happened. The words didn't crush me like they once would have. Instead, I felt anger first, pure, clean, and sharp. I showed the letter to Mrs. Carson. She took it silently, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm calling the police," she said softly. Later, sitting behind the counter, I let the letter rest beside me like an old scar. Ugly but no longer bleeding. At home I told my mother. Her hands clenched, the color draining from her face. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's not your fault," I said, and for the first time I truly meant it. "He doesn't get to control what I feel anymore." She pulled me into a hug so tight it almost hurt, and I let myself lean into it. Winter crept closer, the nights arriving earlier each day. The town hung holiday decorations, strings of white lights, wreaths in every window. At school, talk of winter break bubbled through the halls, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that letter. One night, as snow fell silently outside, I opened my journal and wrote, "He can't take my story. It's mine to keep, mine to tell." The act of writing it felt like sealing something away, not to hide it but to keep it safe. A few days later, I sat across from Lily at the diner. "What if he comes back?" I asked quietly. "Then we deal with it," she said without hesitation. "You're not alone. Not anymore." And she was right. I wasn't the same girl who had stood frozen in that hallway months ago. I had scars, but they weren't shackles. They were proof I'd survived. December arrived, wrapping the town in frost and hush. Christmas lights glowed against the dark, and for the first time in years, my mother and I decorated our small tree together. As we hung the last ornament, she paused, holding a small wooden angel. "Your grandmother gave me this the year you were born," she said, her voice soft. "It's beautiful," I murmured. She nodded, then handed it to me. "I want you to have it." My chest tightened, emotion rising so fast it caught me off guard. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she whispered. "It's always been yours." I placed it carefully on the highest branch, its painted wings catching the light. For a moment, the living room seemed to glow brighter, as if forgiveness itself had become something we could see. A week before Christmas, I went to the river alone, the same spot where Lily and I had spent so many afternoons. The water moved slowly, ice forming along the banks. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fear, the slow, stubborn healing. And I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before. I wasn't the same person who'd stood trembling in that kitchen, terrified of losing my mother's love. I had found my voice again, not because the fear was gone, but because I'd learned it could exist alongside hope. Before leaving, I picked up a small stone and dropped it into the water. "Goodbye," I whispered, not to Mark but to the part of me that still believed I was only what happened to me. Christmas morning was quiet and warm. My mother gave me a delicate silver bracelet, its charm shaped like a tiny heart. For new memories, she said softly. Thank you, I whispered, hugging her. The gift wasn't about replacing what was stolen. It was about something new, something ours. The year turned and January arrived clear and cold. One evening, I sat alone at my desk, flipping through the pages of my journal. I saw my fear etched in ink, my anger, my hope. But most of all, I saw someone who had refused to stay silent. Someone who had chosen truth even when it hurt. And as I closed the journal, I finally understood. Mark hadn't taken my story. He'd only given it a darker chapter. The rest, how it ended, how it continued, that was up to me. Months passed. Spring returned, and with it a softer kind of hope. Lily and I made plans for college. My mother and I planted flowers in the garden, their colors brighter than I remembered. One warm afternoon, as we sat on the porch, my mother turned to me. Do you regret telling me the truth? She asked. I thought about it. The pain it had caused, the silence that had stretched between us, the fear that had followed. No, I said finally. Because it gave us this. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not guilt in her eyes, but pride. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe there will be more letters, more shadows. But I know this. I won't let them define me. Because I am more than what was taken from me. I am what I chose to keep. My voice, my truth, my hope. And that, at last, is enough.